It's November 19th, 2020, and the 2020 Senate elections just took place a little over 2 weeks ago. And on November 3rd, 2020, that was Election Day 2020. That is when we started seeing the results come in for the Senate elections, for the 2020 Senate elections, but not all the results were in by November 3rd. Some of the results took longer to come in, mainly because of mail in ballots. Some states didn't finish counting all of the mail in ballots until several days after that November 3rd election day. And that is also why the 2020 presidential election could not be called for Joe Biden until November 7th, 2020, the Saturday after election day. But finally, after several days, every single Senate race, the outcome was able to be determined, as in which candidate would win each Senate race, with the exception of two Senate races in the state of Georgia. So, both of these Senate races, both the normal Georgia Senate election and the Georgia Senate special election, both of these elections, neither of them have been conclusively decided yet, as in neither of them have been projected to have a winner yet, and they actually won't have a winner for another month and a half. And the reason for this is because both of these Senate races will be going to runoff elections, and these runoff elections will be taking place in early January of 2021, so in around a month and a half from now. I believe the date for both of these is January 5th, 2021. If I'm not mistaken, that's the date for both of these Senate elections, so people who live in the state of Georgia, they will have to vote in both of these Senate races once again, kind of like how they did so in Election Day. And this is the only state in the country that had two Senate races concurrently going on in this election cycle, and the people living in Georgia had to vote in both of them on November 3rd, and they're also going to have to vote in both of them on January 5th. So until that finishes up, until both of those Senate races finish up, we're not going to know for sure what the balance of the Senate will look like. We're not going to know for sure whether or not Republicans have control of the Senate or whether Democrats have control over the Senate. Because at this point in time, it is still possible for either political party to have control of the Senate. If the Democrats win both Senate seats, then they will get to 50 seats in the Senate, and because Kamala Harris will be the vice president and she's a Democrat, the Democrats will essentially have control over the Senate. However, if the Republicans win either one of these Senate races or both of these Senate races, then the Republicans will still have control over the Senate, because without these Senate races, they're already at 50, so if they just get to 51, that's enough to have control over the Senate. So, we're not going to know for a while what the outcome is of the Senate races in total. We're not going to know for sure who has control of the Senate. And the reason why these two Senate races in Georgia had to go to runoff election is because of the fact that in both Senate races, none of the candidates got over 50% of the votes, meaning no candidate in either Senate race got a majority of the votes. In the special election, there were two major candidates from each political party, two from the Democrats and two from the Republicans, and because of that, they split the vote among four candidates, and because of that, it was nearly impossible for any candidate to get above 50% of the vote, and that is why that Senate race had to go to a runoff. But in the normal Senate election with David Perdue and Jon Ossoff, the reason why no one got 50% or higher there is because of the fact that third party candidates were running in that Senate election. And the third party candidates in that election took just enough votes from the major two candidates. Just enough people voted for a third party candidate in that Senate race to the point where neither candidate got above 50% of the vote. David Perdue came so close, the Republican incumbent David Perdue came so close to getting 50% of the vote, but he was just shy of that 50% mark because he only got 49.7% of the vote. But we're going to shade in first what my prediction for the 2020 Senate elections was, which candidates or which political party I thought would win each Senate seat, and then we're going to talk about how accurate my prediction was. We're going to compare my prediction to the final result. So my prediction was that Democrats would win all these northeastern Senate seats, and that actually turned out to be the case. These were pretty easy to predict. They had almost 100% chance of winning these seats. Democrats were almost guaranteed to win all of the northeastern seats, and then Alaska I predicted would be won by Republican. New Mexico and Colorado I predicted both for Democrats. New Mexico, the Democrat had a really good chance of winning here. Colorado originally was a Republican incumbent, but John Hickenlooper won his Senate race against Cory Gardner, the Republican incumbent, and that's why that Senate seat will now be held by a Democrat. So that was my prediction for Colorado and New Mexico. And then South Dakota, Nebraska, Kansas, Oklahoma, all for Republicans. That was a pretty easy guess. Wyoming, Idaho, also Republican wins. That was an easy guess as well. Montana, I said likely Republican, I believe, and it was won by Steve Daines and not Steve Bullock, but I said likely and not safe because Steve Bullock had a small chance of winning because he was sort of well known in the state of Montana. He was the former, or actually, I believe he's the current governor of Montana, if I'm not mistaken, but he has quite a bit of name recognition in that state because one, he's the governor of that state, and two, he ran for president in the 2020 Democratic primaries. He didn't do well, he dropped out before the primaries actually began, but he still got name recognition because of that. Illinois was an easy guess, Democrats obviously would win there. And then Kentucky, even though Mitch McConnell does have a pretty low approval rating nationwide, the people in Kentucky seem to like him, so he was able to get reelected pretty easily. West Virginia is a heavily conservative state, so it makes sense that the Republican would win there. Tennessee, Mississippi, Alabama, all these southern states, South Carolina as well, Arkansas, Louisiana, all won by Republicans. Easy guess there. Even though Lindsey Graham does have a low approval rating nationwide, the people in South Carolina liked him enough to vote him over his Democratic challenger. Texas, even though it's becoming more liberal, it was still a pretty easy win for John Cornyn, the Republican incumbent. Iowa, I was thinking there was a chance it would be won by the Democrat, but Johnny Ernst eventually was able to pull off a pretty comfortable win here. Minnesota and Michigan, even though these states were swing states in the presidential election, they were actually pretty safe for the Democrats. At least I thought so. But for the Michigan Senate race, it actually was a pretty close battle between the Democratic incumbent Gary Peters and the Republican challenger John James. The thing about John James is that he was a pretty young African American who was running as a Republican, and because Republicans don't have as many African American members as the Democrats do, that was sort of his appeal to some people. The fact that he was an African American Republican, and he was also pretty young, kind of like Obama. Think of your Obama kind of guy, but he was a Republican and not a Democrat, so that is why some people thought he was a good candidate to vote for. But in the end, Gary Peters was able to edge out a win here, but it was pretty close. I believe Gary Peters won by less than 2 percentage points against John James. It was really close at one point, and for a while John James was leading, but that was before all the mail-in ballots came in. So it looked like John James might have been able to win that Senate seat for a while, but in the end, Gary Peters came out on top. Then for Virginia, at first it looked like the Democratic incumbent Mark Warner was going to lose here because his Republican challenger was way ahead, but that's just because not all the votes were in yet, and once they actually counted up all the votes, Mark Warner won the Senate race pretty easily. Arizona, this was also pretty safe win for Mark Kelly, even though Arizona has historically been a more conservative state, at least in the last few decades. The fact that Kyrsten Sinema won her Senate race in 2018 as a Democrat in Arizona, that was enough evidence to me that Mark Kelly had a good chance of winning a Senate race there. So I predicted Arizona would be won by the Democratic challenger Mark Kelly, and he ended up winning that Senate seat, so I was right about that. Okay, now we're getting to the two Senate races I was wrong about. So in my prediction video, I talked about how Susan Collins would probably lose the Senate seat to Sarah Gideon and how Cal Cunningham would probably win his Senate race against Tom Tillis, but I was wrong about both of these Senate races, and these are actually the only two Senate races that I have so far been wrong about. The Georgia ones, I'm unsure if I'm going to be wrong about or right about these Senate races, but more likely than not, I will be right about both of these Senate races. I predicted that Georgia would be won by both the Republicans, both Kelly Loeffler and David Perdue. Although I didn't know which Republican candidate would be in the special election, I predicted it would be won by Republican, and that's probably what's going to happen, but we don't know for sure yet. The Democrats seem to be funneling in a lot of money into that Senate race, but the Republicans, I'm assuming, are also doing the same. There's a lot on the line for both political parties because Georgia's going to determine who has a majority. But getting back to North Carolina and Maine, I thought Democrats would win both of these Senate races, but Republicans ended up winning them. So I thought Democrats would be able to get to 50, but they only got to 48 because they didn't win North Carolina or Maine. And Democrats can still get to 50, but they have to win both of those Senate races in Georgia, which is unlikely. I'm just going to say it right off the bat. Democrats are most likely not going to win either of those Senate races. If they win one of them, that's possible, but winning both of those Senate races seems really unlikely at this moment. But that could change. I'll let you know if that changes. So I thought Cal Cunningham would edge out a win against Tom Tillis in North Carolina. The polls showed Cal Cunningham ahead, but it looks like Tom Tillis was able to edge out a win here. The win, his margin of victory was actually pretty slim. He only won by 1.5 percentage points, and for a while it looked like Cal Cunningham had a good chance of winning here, but in the end, Tom Tillis came out on top. Maine is another story though. Even though the polls showed Sarah Gideon having a good chance of winning here. Susan Collins won pretty comfortably. Her margin of victory was pretty strong. It was by several percentage points Susan Collins won by. And that's kind of surprising because I was sort of under the impression that Susan Collins didn't have a high approval rating. And because of that, I thought that Sarah Gideon might be able to pull off a win here in Maine. And she might be able to win the Senate election against the Republican incumbent Susan Collins. But I guess that turned out to not be the case because Susan Collins won pretty comfortably. I don't know if this is the case, but one of the reasons why she might have been able to pull off a win here was because of the fact that she did not vote to confirm Amy Coney Barrett in the Senate. And the thing about Susan Collins is that she is known as more of a moderate Republican senator, meaning she is a Republican and she will generally vote more in line with the Republicans, but she is a moderate, she's not that conservative, so at times she will side with the Democrats instead of Republicans on certain issues. But in general, Susan Collins is a moderate Republican. She's not that far right, she's not that conservative, but she still calls herself a Republican. She still sides with the Republicans in general. So, this appears to be the outcome as of now. This is not the final outcome because Georgia has not been decided yet because of the runoff elections, but this is the outcome for what all we know. Republicans are going to have at least 50 seats, Democrats are going to have at least 48 seats. Republicans will have anywhere between 50 and 52 seats. Democrats will have somewhere between 48 and 50 seats, but the chances of Republicans having a majority is a lot higher than the chances of Democrats having a majority. Republicans have to win both of the Senate seats in Georgia, or no, Democrats have to win both of the Senate seats in Georgia. Republicans only have to win one of them. Georgia is a more conservative state than the United States as a whole. Even though Biden was able to pull off a surprise victory here against Donald Trump in the state of Georgia, I don't think the same logic will necessarily apply to the Senate races because a lot of people voted for Joe Biden at the presidential level but still voted for a Republican senator or a Republican in the House of Representatives. So the chances of Democrats winning both of these Senate seats is pretty unlikely. For the special Senate election, I would say that Kelly Loeffler actually has a good chance of losing that election, good in relation to all of the other Senate races in Georgia in the past decade or so. Georgia is more conservative in general, but in this specific special election in Georgia, Raphael Warnock actually has a pretty good chance of taking the Senate seat from Kelly Loeffler. Raphael Warnock is the Democratic challenger, Kelly Loeffler is the Republican incumbent. Thing about Kelly Loeffler is, I've talked about this in another video, she got herself involved in a scandal earlier this year because she used some insider information that was delivered to her at a Senate briefing in order to personally benefit from that. I'm pretty sure it had something to do with the stock market. She used insider information only delivered to her and a few other people, not available to the general public. She used that to profit. She used that for her own personal gain. So a lot of people are not happy because of that, and that is why I think Raphael Warnock has a chance of winning the special Senate election in Georgia. But for the normal Senate election, I think David Perdue has a pretty good chance of winning that Senate election. I don't think his Democratic challenger, Jon Ossoff, has a good chance of winning that election. David Perdue is not as nearly as disliked as Kelly Loeffler is. David Perdue hasn't really been involved in any major scandals that would warrant him having a good chance of losing the Senate race against Jon Ossoff, but that could still change. The Senate race is still a month and a half away. This is like middle of September in terms of the presidential race, as in 1.5 months left until the actual election is here. So there's still quite a bit of time left for things to turn around and things to change. And who knows, maybe in a month from now, the Democrats will have a better chance of winning both of these Senate seats than currently, but we'll just have to see.